Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into a really fascinating concept known as the Prince of Darkness, and we're going to uncover exactly how ancient mythology perfectly maps onto modern political power. It's a pretty wild journey, actually. We'll be connecting the way our ancestors made sense of a chaotic universe directly to how modern power brokers navigate the shadowy, high-stakes corridors of Washington, D.C.
Let's kick things off with a question that we humans have wrestled with for literally millennia. What is the true nature of the Prince of Darkness? Is darkness just an absolute, unmitigated evil, or is it actually a necessary counterpart to power and light? As you'll see, the answer is rarely black and white. And honestly, understanding this duality is absolutely crucial to understanding how power actually operates, whether we're talking about the grand cosmos or our nation's capital.
So, to get to the bottom of this, our explainer is going to trace this concept from its cosmic origins straight through to its human application. We'll be covering 1. Defining radical evil, 2. Mythological roots of darkness, 3. A modern Prince of Darkness, 4. Washington's culture of duplicity, 5. Presidents, power, and controversies, and finally, 6. The price of candor. All right, let's jump into Section 1, Defining Radical Evil, and the 3 categories of evil.
So, philosophers have historically broken down the very real suffering in our world into 3 distinct buckets. First up, there's metaphysical evil. This is basically just the necessary lack of perfection in a created universe. The idea that, hey, nothing can be truly flawless. Then you have natural evil, which covers the unpredictable suffering caused by natural processes. Think storms, earthquakes, droughts, that kind of thing. But the absolutely crucial category for us today is moral evil. This happens when intelligent beings knowingly and deliberately choose to inflict suffering upon another. While natural and metaphysical evils are just blind, unthinking forces of the universe, it's moral evil that really forces us to personify darkness. It compels us to look for a face, an intellect, a literal prince behind the malice.
Moving right along to Section 2, Mythological Roots of Darkness, the Coincidence of Opposites.
What's really fascinating about ancient societies is that they didn't actually see pure good and pure evil as totally separate, isolated things. Instead, they saw this intricate, inseparable blend. Think about M.C. Escher's striking woodcut, The Scapegoat. It brilliantly illustrates this philosophical idea of the coincidence of opposites. It shows how the divine, represented by the light figure, and the demonic, represented by the dark goat, are often just 2 sides of the exact same cosmic coin. The belief was that good and evil both stem from a single, ambivalent divine principle. You simply couldn't have one without the other. And we see this duality pop up all over the globe, right? Take the Mesoamerican deity Quetzalcoatl. On one hand, you have a benevolent god of life, and right alongside it, the grim god of death. Cultures across the ancient world intrinsically recognize that you cannot have the fertile, life-giving spring without the dying, barren autumn. They routinely personify these opposing forces as twins, doublets, or dual-faced gods. Darkness wasn't just some evil to be completely eradicated. It was a necessary, albeit terrifying, component of cosmic balance.
Which brings us to Section 3, A Modern Prince of Darkness, From Myth to Man.
Okay, let's transition from the realm of ancient gods to the highly competitive modern realm of human politics. Just as the ancient Egyptians saw the cosmos torn between the god Horus, representing fertile life, and the god Seth, representing the harsh, deadly desert, modern Washington, D.C. operates on a remarkably similar duality. You have public Washington, the smiling faces, the polished speeches, the pristine, patriotic facade. And then you have private Washington, the shadowy backroom deals, the whispered negotiations, and the downright ruthless pragmatism required to actually govern. It's the exact same coincidence of opposites we just saw in mythology. To survive and thrive in this environment, you have to fully understand both the light and the dark.
Enter Robert Novak. He was a notoriously candid, deeply cynical political journalist who spent 50 years covering every U.S. president from Harry Truman to George W. Bush. His colleagues literally dubbed him the Prince of Darkness because of his dark suits, his famously unsmiling demeanor, and his fearless willingness to say the things no one else would even touch. But the kicker? Novak didn't reject the title. He completely leaned into it. He weaponized his Prince of Darkness persona to survive, to aggressively cultivate sources, and to expose the uncomfortable truths of a two-faced city. Let's look at how he did it in Section 4, Washington's culture of duplicity, navigating the shadows.
The key here is really understanding the specific ecosystem Novak was operating in. He put it pretty bluntly himself, saying, Little in Washington is on the level. He recognized a pervasive culture of what's often been described as soul-numbing duplicity. In the Capitol, every relationship, every statement, every handshake, it's all deeply strategic and calculated. To survive and actually report the truth in that kind of environment requires a remarkably thick skin, relentless skepticism, and an acceptance that you just have to walk in the dark to find the light. And what's crazy is he mastered this duplicity while watching journalism completely transform. He started out back in the 1950s, which was this gritty era of shoe leather reporting, where careers were built entirely on deep personal relationships, cultivating sources over decades, and, quite frankly, the ability to hold your liquor. By the 1980s, he seamlessly adapted to the rise of television, becoming a huge talking head. And eventually, the 2000s brought the internet age and the relentless 24-hour news cycle. Through all these vastly different eras, his profound mastery of Washington's dual nature kept him at the absolute top of his field.
Now for Section 5, Presidents, Power, and Controversies, Brutal Candor in Action.
So how did this Prince of Darkness handle the most powerful people on the planet? Well, with brutal candor across the board. He definitely didn't play favorites based on party lines. He found JFK great fun to cover and saw LBJ as this larger-than-life commanding figure. Interestingly, he admired Ronald Reagan, noting that the president was more clever and devious than most imagine, which, coming from the Prince of Darkness, is basically a compliment of the highest order when it comes to political survival skills. On the flip side, he sharply criticized Jimmy Carter, labeling him a habitual liar, which really reflects Novak's deep skepticism of moral posturing in a city built fundamentally on duplicity.
But, stepping that deep into the shadows definitely has its risks. His willingness to plunge into the dark side of politics really peaked with the Valerie Plame CIA leaks scandal. By publishing the name of a covert CIA operative, Novak became the absolute center of a massive controversy involving government retaliation and the protection of sources. It was a pivotal event that showcased both his immense, unparalleled influence in Washington and his own candid admission that his hunger for an exclusive story made him vulnerable to being manipulated by his own high-level sources.
And through the whole ordeal, he remained totally unapologetic. I mean, his published assessment of Valerie Plame's husband, Ambassador Joe Wilson, who had publicly criticized the administration, was literally just, "What an asshole." Never one to mince words, his blunt assessments prove he valued raw, unapologetic truth-telling way more than making friends or maintaining polite political decorum. He was there to expose the hidden machinery of power, not to be liked by the people operating it.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 6, The Price of Candor, Standing Alone in the Dark.
Because embodying this kind of archetype comes with a huge personal cost. Ultimately, Novak maintained a fierce psychological independence. Despite being a lifelong champion of American conservatism, he actually boldly broke ranks and opposed the Iraq War very early on. Because of this stance, he was viciously accused of wishing for defeat by his own conservative allies. He was suddenly shunned by longtime friends. His calls to powerful sources went completely unreturned. But by opposing the war, Novak proved his absolute independence. He chose to be actively ostracized by his own political tribe rather than sacrifice his journalistic integrity. He truly stood alone in the dark.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative question to chew on. Can you really navigate a world of duplicity with your integrity intact? Whether we're talking about ancient gods balancing cosmic life and death, or a modern journalist navigating the smiling facades and shadowy backrooms of Washington, D.C., power and truth are undeniably complex. Sometimes, embracing the shadows, acknowledging the dual nature of reality, just like the archetypal Prince of Darkness, is the only way to truly bring the truth into the light. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of power and darkness.